In my video on rumination, I said that one of the best ways to deal with this annoying psychological mechanism is to channel Sisyphus. So let's talk about what that means. In the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, don't worry, we're going to get to Sisyphus, right? Stick with me. In the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, King Arthur comes across a couple of peasants toiling in the mud.
Old woman! Man! Ma'am, sorry.
He calls out to one of them, presuming the person to be an old woman, only to find out that the peasant is actually a 37-year-old man named Dennis. Arthur apologizes for the misunderstanding, but Dennis isn't having any of it.
What I object to is you automatically treat me like an inferior. Well, I am king. Oh, king, eh? Very nice.
This throws Arthur off his game. I mean, whoever heard of a peasant talking back to a king, right?
I'm Arthur, king of the Britons.
King of the who?
The Britons.
Who are the Britons?
Well, we all are. We are all Britons. And I am your king.
I didn't know we had a king. I thought we were an autonomous collective.
An autonomous collective in 12th century feudal England? What the hell is she talking about? Well, before I explain, let's go back a little further. Well, okay, a lot further, back to about 700 BCE, and talk about Sisyphus. We all know the story of Sisyphus, the man who pissed off the gods so utterly that they damned him to an eternity of rolling a boulder up this ginormous hill, only to have the stone slip away inches from the top and roll back down to the bottom of the valley. The myth is famous, at least in part, because it is so relatable. In his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, Albert Camus equates the punishment of Sisyphus with the plight of the average employee, endlessly toiling away at some mundane and meaningless task. The workman of today works every day in his life at the same tasks, and his fate is no less absurd. But then Camus says something interesting. But it is tragic only at the rare moments when it becomes conscious. This has been interpreted in a variety of ways by people far smarter than me. But for me, this is how I have chosen to internalize this idea. As far as the gods were concerned, Sisyphus's purpose and meaning have been defined by his punishment, to pointlessly roll the stone to the top of the hill, only to then fail at the last possible moment. His fate is what it is. The gods have decreed it, and there's no fighting the gods. And yeah, if Sisyphus had desired to roll the stone to the top of the hill and then stop, well, he's going to be forever miserable because it just doesn't work like that. But he doesn't want to be miserable in his work any more than you or I do. So if he's ever going to be at peace with his endless and meaningless task, something has to change. But since he can't change the nature of his punishment, he instead has to change his purpose. This means doing what he has been condemned to do, but not for the reasons given to him by the gods, but for his own reasons. By doing this, he can steal the power away from the gods and take it for himself. What might this look like? Well, maybe he decides that this time he's going to see if he can take a total of 1,000 steps on his way up the hill before the rock slips out of his grip and rolls back down to the bottom. Then he'll see if he can do it in exactly 999 steps and so forth, right? Kind of like bottles of beer on the wall. It really doesn't matter what purpose he sets for himself. What matters is that it is his own purpose. That way, success is always a possibility. And where there's the possibility of success, there's purpose and meaning. Sisyphus is not refusing to roll the stone up the hill. He's just refusing to do it for their reasons. This is why I think Camus then says, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. As far as I'm concerned, he's happy because he's doing what he must, but for the reasons that make what he's doing personally meaningful. Returning to Dennis and King Arthur, we see that the peasants are doing much the same sort of thing. Dennis and his companion are not actively rebelling against Arthur, Britain, or even the monarchy. They're hardly even aware of the existence of this system of government and what Arthur represents. What they are rebelling against is the idea that they are subjugated inferiors without free will and without self-determination. Mind you, this doesn't change the nature of their work. They're still toiling in the filth, collecting peat for fuel and what have you, but they're doing it for their own personal autonomous reasons, not simply because the system has decreed that they must. You work in a system that seeks to control you. You can rob the system of that control and take it for yourself, all while looking like a good corporate citizen. Water is wet. I know, and bear with me. Water is wet, and that's its state, that's its nature. It's what I call an environmental constant. It's what it is. It's what the system says it is. One can wish that water were not quite so wet, but that would be futile. It is an environmental constant. Water is wet. But sometimes we get it in our heads that an environmental constant has to change for us to be happy and fulfilled. I call this insisting on a false condition. A false condition is an environmental state that we perceive as necessary for our success, but which is truly out of our control. For example, a fish may insist that in order for it to be happy and fulfilled, water needs to be just a little bit less wet. This is a false condition. For Sisyphus, his environmental constant, the conditions of his punishment, ensure that the stone will always roll back just before reaching the top. Insisting that happiness can only come from reaching the summit is a false condition. The system sets the rules. The system sets the environmental constants. And as Mike Lefebvre says, you can't sock a system. Mike Lefebvre, the steelworker in Stud Terkel's Working. The man is one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, I'm telling you. But you can operate in that system according to your own purpose. Our lives may require us to accept our own environmental constants and work within its systems. But that doesn't mean that we need to chase after false conditions. We can work within the constraints of the system, but for our own purposes. All right, that's all I have to say about that. So go off and make some trouble, and we'll see you later.